Ping is one of those programs that I and probably most people on Linux don't really run that often. Basically, I'll only run it when I'm installing my distro just to make sure I have a network connection. Usually it's not a big deal when I'm running on Ethernet, but especially when I'm using Wi-Fi, checking that I actually do have a connection is really, really important. And besides that, it's just generally to check if my connection is actually working. Maybe it'll show in my network manager that I do have a connection, but I'm not actually able to connect to any websites. And then ping can be used to determine if there's a problem with my browser or if it's actually my connection itself. But maybe you want a little bit more from ping. Maybe you want a Rust rewrite of ping known as Gping, which is the application that we're looking at today. So right now, I'm just pinging google.com because I might as well ping google.com. So we don't have a ton of stuff going on in here, but you probably notice the biggest difference between regular ping and Gping straight away, and that is that Gping makes use of a graph, and that's what the G in Gping actually stands for. So off to the left-hand side of the graph, we have the ping itself, and then along the bottom of the graph, we have the time frames. So as pings are actually being made over time, it'll update this graph live. And along the top, we have the URL that we're connecting to, along with its associated IP address. In this case, the IP address is an IPv4 address. Then we have the minimum ping inside of the range that is currently visible, and next to that is the maximum ping. So as soon as this goes outside of the range on the graph, we'll notice the maximum ping actually drops, and now it's back to 40.3. And then this P95 value, I wasn't really sure about because the documentation makes no mention of it, but after doing a bit of research, P95 is a measurement of jitter, which is basically a measurement of how much the ping actually fluctuates. And by default, this is going to be drawn with Unicode Braille characters, so if your terminal doesn't support that, there is an option we can use instead of that. So if we go out of this and then pass in the -S option, that will then draw it with periods instead of those Braille characters. Just some terminals have an issue actually rendering them. Most modern terminals will be fine though. Now, because this is a graph, you may rightly expect you can ping multiple websites at the exact same time. So let's go and try that. Let's go and ping google.com along with, let's say, lukesmith.xyz, and why not also pass in twitter.com as well? Okay, Luke's website might not have been the best idea because apparently the ping wildly fluctuates. So let's try a different website then. Let's try just Google and Twitter. That should work better. Okay, so we have the Google line right here, and the Twitter line hasn't shown up just yet. It should try to ping the website in just a moment. It must be having trouble actually connecting to it. And there we go. It made one ping to it. Maybe Twitter actually has some countermeasures against doing pings. After letting it run for a bit longer, that does seem to be the case. So here's a much better example. Here is Google, YouTube, and Facebook all running at the exact same time. So as you actually add more websites into the graph, it will cycle through the colors available to your terminal. So it's going to first go through your main 16 colors, and then it will go through the other 240 colors supported by a 256 color terminal. So this isn't a true color application, so it should work on most terminals just fine. I haven't tested what happens when you go past 256 pings at the same time, but the application basically breaks far beyond that point. Because it is a terminal application, I would say anything more than 10 probably becomes pretty hard to see. In the URL section up the top here, it's generally going to resolve to an IPv4 address. However, we can go and specify what we want to use. So if we pass in the -4 option, that will force it to be IPv4, and if we obviously then go and pass in the -6 option, that will then resolve it to IPv6. Now, this is just graphing pings, which is perfectly fine, but it wasn't fine for the developer. So let's quit out of the application and run gping --cmd, and let's pass in the ls command, for example. And what this is going to do is graph the execution time of the ls command. And you can do this with any command out there. So if you just want to see how quickly various commands you have on your system actually run, especially like in relation to others, this could actually help out. I know there are separate applications that do go and do this, but because this is built into it, you might as well go and use it. Honestly, it might actually be pretty useful for a video. I can actually test out how quickly, say, a replacement for LS is relative to LS. As we can see along the bottom, by default, we only see 30 seconds of results. So we can actually go and change this by passing in the -B option and then specifying how much we want to see. So this is the buffer size. Let's say I want a buffer size of 120 seconds, for example. Now, do keep in mind that the higher you do make this value, the more the data is going to be squished together. And because you are in a terminal, it does get at some point very difficult to see any meaningful results. Along with that, you can change how frequently updates are made by passing in the -N option, which for some reason has a weird restriction where it can't go above 1 second. By default, it's set to 0.5 though, so let's set it to, say, 0.1, and we'll get rid of this part right here and just set the buffer back to normal. Now every 0.1 seconds, it's going to try to rerun the command and update the data inside of the graph. If you are graphing a command, on slower systems, this may mean you'll have some performance issues. One very common thing I see with these Rust rewrites is a lot of visual configuration, but in the case of Gping, there is absolutely none of that. Basically, you just get the options, and that's everything. But what I would like to see is maybe be able to like recolor what's up here, maybe be able to recolor the data in here, change the symbol that's actually being used, because while we do have the Unicode Braille and the period, maybe I want to use an asterisk, or maybe I want to use an O, or anything else like that, and there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to do that. Another thing that would be really cool is being able to swap the graph around, so instead of having it be the ping over time, maybe have it be time over ping. I think that would be pretty cool. I don't know how useful it would be, but it would be a nice addition. Also, because ping is usually just used to check a network connection, it would be cool to have like a default URL that you can set in a config file, and then just by running the gping command with nothing else passed into it, it would then go and just run ping on that URL. Along with having things like a default resolve type, a default buffer length, a default interval size, all of these things would be pretty small changes, but I think would be massive improvements to the way the application actually works, and would make it actually stand out from the base version of ping. Now, I didn't mention this earlier, but you can go and run gping with an IP address. You don't just need to pass in a URL, it'll work just fine with an IPv6 or an IPv4 address. So if you wanted to say, for example, ping your server that doesn't have a URL attached to it, you can still go and do that. And you may have spotted this just before, but if we go and run gping without any arguments, you'll notice it takes us just to a completely blank screen. What it should do is either error out the application and not take you to this screen whatsoever, or give you an option to actually enter a URL inside of the application, because as it currently stands, doing nothing really confuses the user and doesn't make any sense why it's like this. If you don't want to go and ping google.com and you want your own server to ping, maybe you can go and grab one over on Linode. If it runs on Linux, you can run on Linode. They have the distros you'd expect available, like Ubuntu and Debian, but also Arch and Gentoo, because why not? They've got multiple server plans available, so whether you want to host a blog or a personal VPN, you know there's going to be one that fits you. Going forward, I'll be using Linode to host all of my community game nights. If you need help, Linode has 24/7, 365 support available by phone regardless of your plan size. So right now, you guys can get started on Linode with $100 credit by going to the link on screen or in the description down below. Linode was in the game 3 years before Amazon entered cloud computing, so you know they know their stuff. A huge thank you to Linode for sponsoring the channel. So I think that's going to be pretty much everything for me, but before I go, I would like to thank my supporters. So a special thank you to Chris, Joachim, Donald, Michael, Andre, Nathan, David Monzar, Will, Brennan, Chico Bento, Jamie Joseph, Mitchell Peter D, Stephen Tony Tushar, and all of my $2 supporters. If you'd like to go support my work, then the links down below to my Patreon, Subscribe Star, LibrePay, all that sort of stuff. I've got my podcast, Tech Over Tea, available basically anywhere, and then this channel is available on Odyssey and BitChute if you want to watch it somewhere that isn't YouTube. So I think that's pretty much everything for me, and I'm out.